I'd been looking forward to coming home for months, imagining the relief of familiar surroundings and the comfort of my shared apartment. But when my keys wouldn't turn in the lock, a chill ran down my spine. My brother Eric's actions flickered before me like a warning I should have seen coming, but didn't. I pressed the buzzer helplessly, hoping this was some kind of mistake. Standing outside the door to what used to be my home, I felt a growing sense of unease. The realization hit me hard when the building manager showed up and informed me that the lease had been changed in Eric's name alone. My protest seemed hollow against the cold indifference of the circumstance. My heart pounded as I rushed to our bank, thinking perhaps it was all a misunderstanding that Eric could quickly clarify. But when I checked our joint account, everything had been wiped clean. All the money I had saved during my deployment, gone. I sat there, staring at the zeros on the screen. The betrayal was as clear-cut as it was brutal. Eric and I had grown up with an understanding. We were family. We shared everything, especially since our parents passed. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he could betray me so deeply. I tried to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring felt like a door slamming in my face. After a few moments of stunned silence, I realized there was more to uncover here. The lease wasn't just changed, it was rewritten during my absence, as if I never existed. It felt like an erasure, a calculated move to cut me from the life I thought we both valued. I left the bank, each step heavy with disbelief and anger simmering just beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, pushing back the impulse to lash out. I needed time to think, to gather my next steps. This wasn't just about money or an apartment. It was about trust, about Eric slicing deeper than any weapon I'd ever faced in the field. But in that moment, all I could do was accept the undeniable reality standing before me. I sat on a bench outside the bank, the city bustling around me, feeling strangely detached from the world as it moved on without me. My mind raced with questions and potential accusations, but I knew better than to act without a plan. In the military, you learn the value of patience, of strategic response rather than impulsive reaction. I decided not to confront him until I understood fully what he'd done. I needed to regain my footing, collect the pieces of my life that had been so abruptly shattered. The challenge now was clear: to gather evidence, to seek reparation, to find out why he did it and what I could do about it without descending into chaos. Returning from deployment, stepping off the plane, I had pictured a warm homecoming, a reunion with my only brother who once seemed to stand by me against the world. Instead, I found myself in a battle I never anticipated, trying to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But amidst the turmoil, there was a strange calmness in me. Maybe it was the training, or maybe it was the core belief that justice would eventually prevail. Whatever it was, I knew I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. My path to resolution had only just begun. As I sat on the bench outside the bank, I realized I needed to know exactly what I was up against. So, I collected myself and headed back to the apartment building, hoping to find some kind of paper trail that could provide more insight. The apartment manager handed me a stack of mail that had piled up during my absence. As I sifted through it, one envelope stood out. Its return address was from a lawyer's office I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter that seemed almost surreal. According to the letter, I had apparently signed over my rights to both the apartment and our funds to Eric. The legal jargon was dense and impersonal, but the implication was all too clear. It claimed I had willingly relinquished everything, as if I'd just decided to hand my life over on a silver platter. My hands shook slightly as I read it, feeling the betrayal sink in even deeper. This was more calculated than a simple act of greed. It was a premeditated strike. I knew Eric had some connections from his brief stint in law school before he dropped out, but I never imagined he'd use them against me like this. I felt like I was being erased from my own existence, with this letter serving as the cruel instrument. It was pathetic in a way that he'd go to such lengths to cut me out, but there was also a cold realization settling in. He had planned it meticulously, counting on my absence and trust. I refused to let anger cloud my judgment, but it simmered just beneath the surface. The letter was a challenge, one I was determined not to back down from. As I clutched the letter, I decided on my next move. The military taught me to rely on evidence, to be thorough and precise. I'd do the same here, gathering everything I could to prove my case. Eric might have thought he was clever, but he'd miscalculated one thing, underestimating my resolve. I spent the evening laying out every piece of paper I had, hoping to untangle the web my brother had spun. I went through old lease agreements, my deployment orders, anything that could contradict the so-called evidence Eric's lawyer had. I was determined to find a way to counter every falsehood, every baseless claim in that lawyer's letter. It was strange, feeling so alone yet so resolute. As the night wore on, I could hear the distant hum of the city through the window, a constant reminder that life continued, indifferent to my turmoil. But I knew I couldn't let this defeat me. There was too much at stake, not just materially, but personally. Eric might have thought he'd cornered me, but I was just getting started. Laying the letter aside, there was a clarity that filled the room. I could see the path ahead, albeit littered with challenges. However, for the first time since my return, I felt a sense of control seeping back. Eric might have aimed to weaken me, but he'd only made me more determined. As I settled the papers back into a stack, I knew what I had to do next: gather the evidence, quietly prepare my case, and proceed with caution. Justice was more than just a hope, it was now my mission. Eric finally picked up when I called him, his voice dripping with a smugness I didn't recognize. It was like he'd become a stranger overnight. I started simply asking why he did it, even though I knew his lawyer's letter had already outlined the betrayal in cold, detached prose. But instead of an apology or an attempt to explain, Eric chuckled. His laugh grated on me, sharpened. He said he'd use the money to pay off his personal debts, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Apparently, he thought his problems outweighed mine. Hearing him so casually admit to using what was half mine left me mute for a moment. The calculated nature of his betrayal was more infuriating than I expected, but I didn't let him hear that anger. I reined it in, held it close under a veneer of calmness. I didn't argue with him. There was no point in starting a fight I wasn't prepared to win. I needed more than anger. I needed proof, a strategy. I knew my brother well enough to recognize he'd taken great care in crafting this trap. So I kept my voice even, detached, while my mind raced ahead, planning my next steps. The military trained me to focus under pressure, to strategize, and now I was putting those skills to use. Eric, sensing my silence as a victory, continued talking. It was all about him, his struggles, his needs, with not a word of acknowledgement for what his actions had done to me. It was astounding, really, how he pictured himself the protagonist of this sordid tale, casting me as merely an inconvenience in his grand story of self-preservation. While he talked, I made mental notes of what needed to be done. I would gather the evidence I needed quietly, without alerting him to my plan. Talking to Eric further would serve no purpose. His words were nothing more than noise meant to drown out the truth, a desperate attempt to justify the unjustifiable. So I let him ramble. His voice faded into the background as I imagined the documents that would piece together the truth. Bank statements, old correspondence, deployment orders, each one a brick to build my case. I stayed on the line just long enough to commit Eric's excuses to memory, because even his words might prove useful later. Before hanging up, I finally asked him one last question, not for the answer, but for the effect it would have on him. Are you proud of what you've done, Eric? There was a brief pause on his end, a crack in his composed facade, before he mumbled some half-hearted justification. I ended the call without another word, knowing that I'd planted a seed of doubt in his mind. The night stretched out before me, filled with the resolve to see this through. In my room, I gathered everything I could find that would help expose Eric's deceit. Each document, each piece of evidence, was a step closer to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I'd let my brother think he'd won this round, but I was in it for the long game. And I wasn't about to lose. The following morning, as the sun streamed through the thin curtains of my temporary room, I felt a new resolve settle over me. Eric's betrayal still stung, but I wouldn't let it cripple me. Instead, it fueled my determination to set things right. I had a simple plan: collect the evidence methodically, piece by piece, and prepare to unveil the truth when the time was right. I started by visiting the bank. Standing in line, I felt a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, a mix of anger and apprehension. When my turn finally came, I approached the teller, explaining quietly that I'd returned from deployment only to find my joint account emptied. There was a flicker of sympathy in her eyes as she checked the system. She handed over the printouts I requested, the transactions glaringly evident in black and white. Each withdrawal and transfer was like a fresh wound, but they were also proof of Eric's deceit. I thanked her, taking the crisp sheets with me, knowing they were crucial pieces of the puzzle. Next, I needed the lease documents. The thought of facing the building manager again wasn't pleasant, but it had to be done. As I approached his office, I noticed how my steps echoed in the hallway, a stark reminder of my isolation in this battle. Mr. Graham, the manager, looked up from his desk as I entered. His face was a mix of impatience and mild curiosity, a man who had seen too many tenant disputes. I explained I needed copies of the old lease agreements, specifically the ones Eric and I had signed together. He nodded, rifling through a filing cabinet, and after a few minutes handed me a folder. His expression didn't change as he asked if there was anything else he could do. No, I replied, taking the documents and leaving his office without looking back. I could feel the documents in my hands, a tangible reminder of what had been taken from me. Back in my room, I spread everything out on the small table. Bank statements, lease agreements, each document told a piece of the story Eric had tried to rewrite. I could feel a sense of purpose growing within me, replacing the anger with the focus I needed to move forward. I knew I was still a long way from reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but these papers were my allies. As night fell, I found myself going over the evidence again, ensuring no detail was overlooked. I dug out my deployment orders, a stark reminder of commitment and sacrifice, and included them with the other documents. Each piece of paper was a testament to my truth, a shield against the lies Eric had spun. In the quiet of those evenings, I would let my thoughts drift back to Eric's words. His arrogance, his certainty that I would simply accept what he had done. It was a bitter memory, but one I used to fuel my resolve. He had thought himself invincible, untouchable, but no one is beyond accountability. The evidence continued to grow, each new document adding weight to my case. I knew Eric would not expect this quiet gathering of proof, this deliberate preparation. He was too wrapped up in his own narrative to see what was coming. With each passing day, I felt less like a victim and more like an agent of my own destiny, taking quiet satisfaction in each step forward. I was ready to seek advice from someone who could help me navigate this legal maze. But first, I needed to ensure my case was airtight, that the truth was undeniable. I would not let Eric think he had won. Not yet. And with that thought in mind, I gathered the papers once more, slipping them into a folder. The time would come for confrontation, for justice. But for now, I would remain in the shadows, preparing my quiet revenge with the calm assurance that the truth was on my side. The next morning, I sat in the cramped office of Sergeant Major Connolly, my military legal advisor on base. His walls were lined with rows of medals and certificates, a testament to his years of service and dedication. He looked over the documents I had brought, flipping through them with the studied precision you'd expect from someone who's seen it all. "This is a serious offense," he stated, the firmness in his voice mirroring my internal resolve. "The actions Eric took are not just unethical, they're fraudulent." He paused, looking up from the papers, meeting my eyes with a steady gaze. "You were deployed, fulfilling your duty, and this is how he repays you?" A wave of relief mingled with my anger. Finally, I had confirmation that what Eric did wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. Hearing that from someone like Sergeant Major Connolly made it all the more real. I nodded, my expression, as I tried to keep my emotions in check. "What can I do?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. It was time to take action, not get entangled in the injustice of it all. Connolly pushed the documents back across the desk toward me, hinting at his confidence in what was to come. "We can file a formal complaint against him," he said, his tone clear and unequivocal. "This will start the legal process, and with these documents as evidence, you have a solid case." I absorbed his words, the weight of them settling into my bones. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but I wasn't alone in this. The military had my back. That thought was reassuring, like a gentle anchor holding me in place. I leaned forward slightly, feeling the surge of purpose returning to me. As we began drafting the necessary paperwork, Connolly asked about the details of my relationship with Eric. I explained how we'd always been close, until greed and betrayal had driven us apart. Each word I spoke felt like a betrayal of its own, a truth I didn't want to admit, but could no longer deny. Connolly listened with the patience of someone who had heard countless stories of betrayal before, yet still managed to treat each one with care. When I finished, he raised an eyebrow, his expression as if Eric's actions personally offended him. "It takes a special kind of person to exploit a family member like that," he mused, almost to himself. And there it was, the truth laid bare. Eric was not just a brother, he was a betrayer. And now, the legal gears were finally beginning to turn in my favor. With the formal complaint filed, a sense of quiet determination settled over me. This was just the beginning, but it was a crucial step toward holding Eric accountable. As I left the office, the clatter of boots in the hallway mirrored the clamorous thoughts crowding my mind. Each step brought me closer to the justice that Eric never expected would come. The air outside felt crisp against my skin, a silent reminder that while the world kept moving, my life had been irrevocably altered. Betrayal had a way of changing the landscape of your heart, but it also forged something new, a resolve unyielding and resolute. Still, as I walked back to my temporary room, I couldn't shake the sense of loss mingling with my resolve. It was a different kind of grief, a mourning for the relationship Eric and I once had. But beneath that grief was a whisper of anticipation. Justice was coming, and it would not be denied. With a newfound sense of purpose, I gathered the rest of my documents, organizing them into a polished package that echoed my unwavering dedication. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to restoring what had been taken from me. Eric's deception had been intricate, but my response was deliberate. I knew he would be blindsided by my actions. He'd always underestimated me, seeing only what he wanted to see. A sister overshadowed by her commitments, too far away to notice his machinations. But now, the truth was unfolding, layer by layer, and he would soon realize I was no easy target. The evidence was undeniable, and now with the formal complaint, the wheels of justice were set in motion. Eric may have thought the distance and complexity of my life would grant him impunity, but he underestimated my tenacity. I was ready, poised to reclaim what was rightfully mine. This was my quiet revenge, unfolding with the certainty of truth on my side. The following morning, I sat with Sergeant Major Connolly in a small, unassuming office deep within the military base. The walls were adorned with plaques and certificates, each a testament to the careers that had passed through here. Yet today, the space was consumed by a quiet purpose. Together, we drafted a cease and desist letter directed at Eric, a clear, legal demand for the immediate return of my funds and the restoration of my lease rights. Sergeant Major Connolly reviewed each line with a keen eye, ensuring the letter carried the full weight of my claim. "We need to be precise," he said, glancing up at me. "Eric won't have any room to maneuver once he receives this." I nodded, thankful for his guidance but unable to shake the bitter taste of betrayal. Writing the letter wasn't just about legal jargon. It was about confronting the reality of Eric's actions. Each word we chose felt like a step further away from the brother I thought I knew. Each reforced filtham. I arranged for a courier service to deliver it, knowing that the official nature would underscore the seriousness of the situation. There was a certain satisfaction in picturing Eric's face when he received it, realizing this was no idle threat. Even as I went about making sure every detail was in place, a part of me dreaded Eric's response. He had a way of twisting situations, projecting an air of condescension that made any argument seem futile. This time, however, I had resolved not to engage directly. The letter would speak on my behalf. By late afternoon, the courier confirmed delivery. I imagined Eric retrieving the envelope, likely expecting mundane mail, only to find my decisive response inside. For hours, I heard nothing. And in that silence, my mind wandered to the growing chasm between us, a rift carved by greed and selfishness. Then, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Eric. The subject line alone hinted at his indignation. He had written a lengthy response, half apologies mingling with justifications. Eric insisted he only borrowed the money, claiming he'd planned to pay it back. He went on about the financial pressures he faced, downplaying my own struggles as if his were insurmountable by comparison. I read his words with a calm detachment. There was a time when his excuses might have swayed me, but those days were over. His email carried a tone of dismissal, not acknowledging the gravity of my complaint. But the letter wasn't just a formality. It was a line drawn in the sand. The email did little to deter me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. Eric was right about one thing, though. This wasn't over. But it was no longer a sibling spat he could escape with charm or empty promises. I had taken the first step, and the path to justice was set. As the evening settled, I felt a strange sense of peace. My actions were deliberate and well-founded, backed by the careful preparation and counsel from Sergeant Major Connolly. Eric's shock was inevitable, but it was also necessary. With the cease and desist letter served, I had taken control of the narrative. Whatever Eric chose to do next, I was ready. The legal process was unfolding, and I would not be swayed by his attempts to diminish the severity of his betrayal. For now, I allowed myself the rare luxury of relief, knowing that justice, though perhaps slow, was moving steadily in my favor. The days following Eric's email were a test of patience, a waiting game I knew I'd entered willingly. With each passing day, there was no word from him, just a silence that felt like an admission of guilt. I checked the bank account regularly, each time expecting to see nothing had changed. But I was prepared for the long haul. The legal process, as Sergeant Major Connolly had explained, was not swift, yet it was relentless. One afternoon, as the autumn sun cast a warm glow through my window, an official-looking envelope arrived. It contained a court notice, sternly warning Eric of the impending legal action if he failed to comply with the terms we'd set. As I held the notice, I wondered how Eric would react upon receiving this tangible consequence of his actions. Days turned into weeks, with silence still hanging between us. My resolve remained firm, bolstered by each reassuring nod from Connolly. I spent my days at the base, focusing on the tasks at hand, and evenings were for quiet reflection, facing the inevitable confrontation that was looming ahead. Then finally, one evening, I received a notification from the bank. A rush of adrenaline coursed through me as I logged in to check the account. The balance had changed. Eric had transferred the full amount back. The number staring back at me was unmistakable, confirming that my brother had finally relented. Relief washed over me, though tempered by the realization of what it took to reach this point. I imagined Eric receiving that court notice, the impersonal tone of legal language staring back at him, forcing him to confront the mess he'd created. His bravado, his excuses, all stripped away, leaving him no choice but to act. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about the money itself, it was knowing I had taken the right steps, ensuring he faced the repercussions. Though I hadn't heard directly from Eric since his email, I could picture his reaction, the frustration likely mixed with begrudging acknowledgement of my determination. I had learned by now that silence could hold more power than words, and sometimes it was the quiet, deliberate actions that spoke the loudest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, I sat by the window and allowed myself a moment of contentment. The struggle to reclaim what was rightfully mine had been fraught with emotion, but the victory was sweeter for it. Eric might have thought he could outmaneuver me, use his charm to smooth over his betrayal, but he had underestimated my resolve. The bank transfer was proof that justice was indeed within reach, and Eric's compliance, though reluctant, was a testament to that. There was still a road ahead, steps to ensure everything else was in place, but for the moment, I could breathe easy, knowing I had taken significant strides towards restoring the balance he had so casually disrupted. I knew I would still have to deal with the aftermath, the rebuilding of trust and the sorting out of practicalities, but this small triumph was a reminder that resilience and strategy could overcome deceit. It was more than reclaiming money or signing a lease. It was reaffirming my place, my rights, and my strength in the face of betrayal. The night deepened, quiet enveloping the world outside, as I sat reflecting on the path behind me and the one stretching ahead. This journey had taught me valuable lessons, ones I would carry with me always. Eric had been forced to recognize his missteps, and though the relationship between us might forever be altered, I had no doubt that I was now standing on firmer ground. With a soft, I closed my eyes, feeling the satisfaction of a challenge met and a wrong set right, knowing justice had not only been sought but achieved in a way that echoed my determination and quiet strength. The battle might have been won silently, but its impact was resounding, and that was a victory I would carry with pride. The next morning, I received a call from my lawyer. The sound of her voice had never been more welcome as she confirmed that my name was reinstated on the lease. Eric had finally acknowledged the inevitable and rescinded his claim. It was official now, my rights restored, my home returned to me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was a quiet triumph, one where the victory didn't need a grand fanfare, just a simple acknowledgement of what was rightfully mine. Stepping into the apartment later that day, everything felt both familiar and foreign. The furniture was where we had left it, yet the space felt different somehow. It wasn't marred by Eric's presence, but rather, it was infused with my renewed independence. I ran a hand over the kitchen counter, recalling the countless meals shared, the laughter, and the sibling camaraderie that once filled these walls. It was bittersweet, knowing those memories were tainted now, yet there was solace in the fact that the space was mine to reclaim. As I moved through the apartment, I thought about Eric. I wondered if he felt any remorse, or if he was simply relieved that he wouldn't face legal consequences. There had been so many chances for him to come clean, to reach out and apologize sincerely. But at every turn, he had chosen deception over honesty. The thought was sobering, but it didn't overshadow the satisfaction of knowing I had navigated this storm with dignity. Later that afternoon, I sat down to write Eric a letter, not out of obligation, but because I needed to articulate my feelings. I thanked him, despite everything, for forcing me to recognize my resilience. I explained how his actions had revealed not only the depth of his betrayal, but also the extent of my own strength. It was a letter of closure, both for him and for me. In the days following, I began to reestablish my routines, slowly turning the apartment back into a home. Friends visited, helping to erase the shadows with new, brighter memories. As I shared laughter and stories across the dinner table, I realized that while Eric had taken much, he hadn't and couldn't take everything. The core of who I was and the life I'd built around me were mine, and no betrayal could diminish that. Throughout this journey, I learned several things about trust, about family, about legal systems, and about myself. Perhaps the most important realization was this: no matter how deep the betrayal, the truth eventually surfaces and justice finds its way. As I reflected on these lessons, a sense of peace settled in. I wouldn't let Eric's actions dictate my future or sour my past. He might have altered the path, but he hadn't defined it. Closing the chapter on this experience, I felt gratitude for the victory, not just in reclaiming my rights or my home, but in the reaffirmation of my values and my ability to face challenges head on. It was a win crafted not from loud declarations or public humiliation, but through quiet determination and strategic resolve. The apartment once again felt like a sanctuary, a testament to what I had endured and overcome. Returning to that sense of security was the real reward, and that was something Eric could never take away.